Okay, everybody, so I am making a video today to talk to you about your measure section. So let me come over here. Let me see if I can get this to come back up. There we go. Okay, so I am sharing my screen right now so you can sort of see the documents that you're going to need in order to do the measure section, which is Lab 2. This one is pretty time intensive, but it also doesn't necessarily require SPSS. So I do have the data file pulled up in the background, so I'll sort of show that to you and how everything relates. But you could do the measure section using these two documents. There is something that we will add to the measure section later that does show that does come from SPSS, but we won't be doing that now. We haven't gotten to it. So right now, I want us to focus on how we're going to build just the written part of our measure section. So I have Lab 2 assignment pulled up here. As you'll see, it's due April 15th by 11:59 p.m. The measure section of the method is not complicated. However, it takes time. So just keep that in mind. You cannot wait till the last minute to do this. It just will not work. I've tried to be really clear here in terms of what needs to go into each of these different sections of your paper. So I have like the public image questions, and you're like, okay, well, what are those? So I have the statistics survey pulled up as well, and this is in Canvas. If you notice at the very beginning, these are just our demographic questions. These are the ones that you are running statistics on for your participant section. So I'm going to go down, and here are just these are 6 questions, and I am calling them the public image questions, okay, because it's like, on a typical day, how friendly do you want other people to see you? Okay, on a typical day, how confident do you want other people to see you? I'm calling these being on a bipolar scale because if you look at them, the 1 is marked here as unfriendly, unlikable, and the 10 is marked as friendly and likable. So they're like literally at the 2 opposite poles of that variable. So that's what a bipolar scale means. And if you look down, you know, they change, the words change depending on what type of personality variable we're talking about here, okay? So I've given you a lot of information here in this measure subsection. So I'm like, okay, you need to tell me that it's on a bipolar scale from 1 to 10. The prompt here is to what extent do you want other people to see you as? And then we have all these different categories, 6 different categories here. So describing this in your paper actually could take maybe 2 sentences. It's not going to be very long. I mean, this one, the whole point here is to tell the reader everything about your measures in like the most succinct way possible. So for these, you know, you're just going to see something like participants responded to 6 public image questions using a bipolar scale from 1 to 10. They were asked, to what extent do you want other people to see you as? And then you can have a colon where you're listing out friendly to unfriendly, competent, incompetent, helpless, strong. That's really all you need here. That gives you all the information here that someone could come back in and recreate these questions if they wanted to use them in their own study. They would know enough to be able to do that. Okay. So the self-evaluation section here is actually really similar to the public image section. Same sort of thing, except here we just have like a regular Likert scale from 1 to 10, below average to above average. And then again, we have 6 categories that people are ranking themselves on. So over here in the self-evaluation section, I said, you're using a 1 to 10 Likert scale. 1 is below average, 10 is above average. And the prompt here, how would you rate yourself on, or how would you describe yourself on? And then you have these 6 categories, okay? So same sort of idea here. You're just maybe doing 2 sentences to walk you through that. I will say that when you have something here where like 1 is below average and 10 is above average. The way I normally write that, I'm going to scroll all the way down here really quick to my example. Okay. So just look at this. This is just a little example down here. Okay, so participants completed blah, 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 using a 1 to 7. So here it's got the little anchor that goes with the 1 is in parentheses and italicized. And same thing for the anchor that goes with the 7. And that's pretty typical of how people do these. So you could say for up here, for your self-evaluation section, you could say, you know, participants responded to 6 self-evaluation questions using a 1, and then in parentheses, you could put below average to 10 in parentheses above average, Likert scale. Okay, those 2 sections, super easy. Also, just like when you're looking at this, don't ignore all these comments I got going on over here because they can be really helpful. Okay. That part, easy peasy. The other parts, not so much. They're going to be a lot longer. The reason for that, you guys, is that these other 3 scales here are basically, okay, sorry, you guys. I had to pause really quick because I had a little kid come visit me. So anyway, we are back, and I'm talking to you about the Big 5 inventory. So from this point on in the measure section, what you're dealing with are official published scales that exist in the literature. So the Big 5 inventory is a real scale out there. And if you look over here in the Stats Project survey thing, you'll see that I actually included the reference here for it. Okay, so this is just the Big 5 inventory actually has multiple references for it, but we're just going to use one. So this is from John and Srivastava from 1999. So you do have a references section in this paper, and you will need this in there, and it will need to be in APA format, which is somewhat close, but not exactly there right now. Okay, so going down, let's look at this Big 5 inventory. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we have here, I see myself as someone who is talkative, tends to find fault with others, does a thorough job, is depressed and blue, is original, comes up with new ideas, is reserved, is helpful and unselfish with others. Okay, so a couple of things here. First, we just want to note that this is on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is strongly disagree and 5 is strongly agree, as you have up here. Like I said, the whole scale is called the Big 5 inventory. You will need to provide the citation here. And remember, the citation is just the last names with and 1999 in parentheses. So you could say like John, because that's his last name, and then this little ampersand sign, Srivastava, comma, 1999 in parentheses, and that would work fine. I'll post some references for APA style so you guys can check those out. Let's see. Okay, so the big thing here is that this measures 5 subscales, okay? The Big 5 inventory. It measures basically what they would consider to be the 5 fundamental personality traits that people have. And so those are going to be openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Okay, so the big challenge here is knowing which items go with which scales, right? So in this situation, if you're looking at the full survey here, we have 44, I think, let's just check, 44 total items. That's a lot, okay? Some of those items are measuring things like openness, like how open are you to new experiences. Some are measuring conscientiousness, which means like how reliable and dependable are you, how organized. Some are measuring extroversion, which is like how outgoing and sociable you are. some are measuring agreeableness, which is how friendly and, compassionate you are to other people. And some are measuring neuroticism, which is how anxious, depressed you are, okay? So they're all mixed together in here, and they do that on purpose because they're trying to get you not to like necessarily know exactly what they're measuring, and they don't want you to just get into this habit of like 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. They want for you to give a genuine response each time, so they mix them together to make you think about it more. Of course, on our back end, that makes our job a little harder because we need to know which ones are openness questions, which ones are conscientiousness questions, etc. So it's actually pretty easy to go on the internet and find the scale. It's everywhere. This is a PDF that popped up. I'll show you. Hold on. So if you just search for Big 5 inventory, this one right here is the official site, but they make you answer a survey before they like give you the Big 5 inventory. So you can just come down a little bit and you'll see it here. And this is the one that I clicked, okay? So keep going down. All right, so here are all the questions. Again, same sort of thing. I did check. They're in the same order that we have them, and that's super important right now because when you go down here, this is the scoring instructions. Now, the R situation I will be explaining in the next lab, so you don't really need to worry about that. But here, all right, so you've got extroversion. It's saying that extroversion items are 1, 6, 11, 16, 21, 26, 31, and 36, okay? So there's a couple things you're going to need to know here. The first one is how many extroversion items are there, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? There are 8 extroversion items. You're going to need to know that. And then you're also going to need to give 2 example items from the extroversion scale. So you can pick any of these, like you could pick 11 and 21, you could pick 1 and 6, it doesn't matter to me, but you need to know what those are. So let's say we pick 1 and 6. Then your example items would be, I see myself as someone who is talkative, because that's number 1, and I see myself as someone who is reserved, because that's number 6. Now, is reserved is sort of the opposite of being extroverted, and that's why, come back down, oh, sorry, that's another thing. If you go over to this thing, that's why the 6 has a little R next to it, because it is an oppositely worded item, and we'll have to deal with those later. But it's still counting as an extroversion item. We'll just flip the scores when we get into SPSS again. Okay, so let's go back over here. So I'm talking about a Big 5 scale. It says for each subscale, you're going to need the number of questions used to measure that scale or that variable. So for extroversion, remember there are 8. The Cronbach's alpha, we are going to be doing that in another lab, in lab 3, so we're going to come back in and add those later. And 2 example questions. So our example questions, like I said, for extroversion could be, I see myself as someone who is talkative, and I see myself as someone who is reserved. Now let's just go down here. I've provided an example here that's really similar to the Big 5, but it's from a student's paper that I had for research purposes, and she was using something called a self-disclosure scale. But it's really similar, so you could like set your Big 5 inventory section up like this. Of course, yours would need to be double-spaced, but all right, so you could say the Big 5 inventory developed by, if you wanted to write it into the sentence like that, you'd say John and A&D Srivastava, and then in parentheses 1999, measured the Big 5 personality traits. Participants completed 44 self-report statements using a 1, which is strongly disagree, right, to 5, strongly agree, like liquor, people say it different ways, rating scale. Liquor is technically correct, but nobody says it that way. The scale included 5 dimensions or 5 subscales, whatever you want to say here. And this is where you would list your 5, like extroversion, conscientiousness, openness, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And the way I have it here is like after each one, I told the number of items, and this right here is an alpha symbol. So for right now, you would just leave that blank. You'd be like alpha equals X, and we'd have to come back in and fill them in. Okay, but then after that, we get into where we're giving the example questions. Okay, so it'll be like, you could say like the extroversion subscale, include a statement such as, I see myself as someone who is talkative, and I see myself as someone who is reserved. Okay. And then you would go on and do that for all the other ones too. So like for agreeableness and conscientiousness and openness and neuroticism, you have to have 2 example questions for all of them. Okay, which is why, you know, it starts to get a little bit time consuming. And that's just the Big 5 section, okay? Because then you're going on and you're doing something very similar with the self-compassion section and the life satisfaction section. So let me just come over here, get past the Big 5. Here's our self-compassion scale. All right, same sort of idea here, where I gave you the reference. It needs to be double spaced, but it's looking pretty good. But you'd have to put that into your references section. And in total, this is a short version of the self-compassion scale. So there's only 12 items. But like the Big 5 scale, it does have 3 subscales. So it has self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And so I will link to on Canvas also where you can find the self-compassion scale with what, like if question number 1 is a self-kindness item, a common humanity item, or a mindfulness item. So I'll link to that so you guys, I'll probably just do like a page of references and information for the references, but it'll have the links to the actual scoring for each one of them. So you could go in there and figure out, well, which of these questions goes with self-kindness, which go with common humanity, and which go with mindfulness. And once again, for each of them, you'll need to know the number of questions used to measure each one, the Cronbach's alpha, which we'll come back and fill in later, and 2 example questions. For life satisfaction, this is on a 1 to 7 Likert scale. So similar here. It's technically called the satisfaction with life scale. I'm going to go down here. Oh, there it is. Okay. So you have Diener, Emmons, Larson, and Griffin from 1985. The new APA rules actually say that when you cite this, if you're like putting it in parentheses, you can just say Diener et al., comma, 1985. So I'll also, on the references page, I'll also link to like APA guides and stuff like that, so you guys can look those up. This is really short. There's only 5 questions here. There's no subscales, so you're just talking about the satisfaction with life scale overall. So you'd say participants responded to 5 questions using a 1 to 7 Likert scale. You could put the strongly disagree and strongly agree in parentheses and italics. And then you could say, let's see, we'll come back in, we'll add the Cronbach's alpha later for this one. Yeah, so then all else you would need would be, there were 2 example questions and give some examples, and you could pick any of these 5 as your 2 example questions. Okay, so you have these things as resources, obviously, if you need them. I mean, this whole section here kind of gives you a rundown of what a Big 5 section might look like, which I think is helpful. I basically told you what to say for public image and self-evaluation. So, but it takes some time to get it put together. So just make sure that you have the time when you sit down to do it, or make the time to do it. Okay, and I will get that page of reference information up shortly. Remember, on this page, you'll be able to find the references, and they will link directly to the scales. And in the scales, you'll be able to see like which questions go with which subscale. Okay, so just make sure that you go there for that, and that might be helpful. As always, if you have questions, just let me know. Just make sure that you've watched this video, because hopefully I will have answered most of your questions here. Okay.